Hi, everybody. It's Maya Zahira with Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and we are now live in our Psychic Protection Sanctuary Facebook group. This is our monthly Facebook Live, our monthly free class. And excuse me, I'm just getting over some junk, so sorry if I clear my throat. Today's topic is how the dark forces trick you into not getting help. Okay. So, first I want to give a shout out to everybody who's joining live and everybody who is watching the replay. So hello to everybody. As always, go ahead and say hello. If you're here live, excuse me, if you're here live, go ahead and say hello and where you're joining from, and we'll do some shout outs in just a minute. And I'm going to pop in a cough drop. Okay. So, I've actually been thinking about this topic for several months. I've had a number of situations with clients or students who have come to me, and when we've started working together, they've explained that they had some resistance or some things that happened that kept them from working with me previously. And because they didn't understand what was happening, they thought that it was a sign that they weren't supposed to work with me. Okay. So once I get into explaining some of these stories, I think it'll make more sense. Now, if you've been following my psychic protection videos for a while, you probably already know that what I call the dark forces, like all the negative junk out there in the spiritual world, all the dark forces very intentionally use psychological warfare. So, like on purpose, there will be manipulation and things that they will initiate in order to create confusion. Like that's a very, very common tactic. So keep that in mind as I go into these stories and explain this phenomenon about how people are tricked into not getting the help that they actually need. So I just want to do a couple of shout outs. And hey, I want to say thank you all for being here. Today is really packed. The schedule is really packed because I have my other Facebook group, Spiritual Empowerment Community. We have a big event going on in there. So some of you were on that Facebook Live. So thank you for hopping over and joining this one as well in the Psychic Protection Sanctuary. And so just a shout out to Amira, Zahira from Renton, Washington, and Rochelle and others who are joining us live. Good to see you. All right. It is hard to talk with this big thing in my mouth, so I'm going to take it out. As I always say, I'm just keeping it real. I'm a real person that gets a cough sometimes. So there we go. Okay, so I am going to just glance at my notes here. Okay, so I'm going to share a couple of stories. And I have 3 little stories to share with you. And then I have like a list of tactics that are used. So I'm going to start off with stories, and then I'm going to get into a whole list of tactics that the dark forces use to trick you into not getting help. If you want, you can grab a pen and paper so that when I get into that list, you'll be able to jot it all down. So the first story is that there was someone who came to work with me. Of course, I love all my clients, but I love this person so much. When she first started working with me, I think it was at her first appointment, she said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that I finally came. I know I'm supposed to work with you. I've been having these issues for a while. And she was actually in the process of extracting herself from a very bad spiritual situation. That's all that I will say. And what she shared with me was that she had gotten my book this Darkness Disguised as Light, The Hidden Truth About Psychic Protection and the Illusion Matrix. She said that she had gotten my book over a year ago, and it had been on her shelf, and that every time she went to reach for it, like every time she got like a gut nudge, an inner nudge, like, I'm supposed to read this book, she would go to reach for it, and then she would suddenly get a splitting headache, like her head would just be like killing her all of a sudden. And so she thought maybe that meant there was something wrong with the book, maybe, or that she wasn't supposed to read it. Maybe that was just a sign that she wasn't supposed to read it. And she didn't know, right? So she goes ahead and just doesn't read it, right? And then finally, this situation that she's in is getting worse and worse. And it was a situation where there was spiritual manipulation going on. I will say that. And so eventually the situation is getting worse and worse, so that at one point she finally does say, no, I think I'm supposed to read this book. So she pushed through that feeling of resistance and that feeling in her head, that pain that would happen. And she read the book, and then she was like, oh my gosh, I was totally supposed to read this book. And then she came for a session, and we talked about it, and about how that was actually, that headache that was happening was actually part of that spiritual manipulation that was going on, which I won't go into in detail. But spiritual manipulation, just speaking generally here, it can happen if there's an entity involved that is messing with the person, or it can happen if there's a person involved who is engaging in black magic or misusing their power to control others. Those are two main ways that someone could be manipulated to not get help, right? So every time this person was reaching for my book, she would have this like physical reaction, and it was as a result of manipulation that was happening. And so after she read the book and she started coming to me for sessions, she was like, oh my gosh, I realized that headache was to keep me from working with you. Okay, so that's just one story. But I think as I go through these, it's going to be really helpful, because this kind of thing happens so often, and then people end up not getting help in a timely manner, because I think so often we see things as signs, and we trust those signs. We think that that it means that we trust that whatever the sign is accurate and not a distortion or a manipulation, right? But we've got to understand that how the dark forces work is through manipulation. And one thing that I'll talk about later at the end when I go through this list that I want to just mention now is, like, why would that kind of manipulation happen? Why keep you from having a session? Well, let's say there's an entity attachment. Do you really think the entity wants to be removed? Do you really think that it wants to be removed? Probably not. So it's going to try to stir things up so that the session or the assistance doesn't happen, so that it can keep doing what it's been doing, right? Before I go into the second story, let's just do a couple more shout outs. We have Rochelle from Wisconsin, Jeannie from Piper, Kansas, and we have Melissa joining us as well. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining live. So I'm going to jump into my second story. And, but by the way, these stories are so general. They could happen with anyone. So it's not about a certain person. Like these are these are just really good examples, because they're tactics that would occur so frequently. Okay. So this next one, I was speaking with a colleague who ended up later having some consultations with me regarding psychic protection. But initially, when we were talking in person, we were having a personal conversation, and Now, I didn't know about this until a couple years later, but at the time, what was happening was that whenever I would start to talk about psychic protection and about what I knew to be true about how the spiritual world operates, every time I would start to talk about that, she would get super drowsy. Like she would feel like she had taken a sleeping pill and like she just could not even stay awake. And it wasn't until a couple years later that she told me about this. And she said that at the time she assumed that that meant that there was something wrong with my energy and that she wasn't supposed to work with me, that there was something off. Okay. Now, when she told me about this, I was like, no, that's like total opposite, right? Because what was happening was at the time, she was actually having, I'm aware of the fact that she was in the middle of some spiritual warfare stuff, okay? And so when I would be speaking the truth about these things, the things that were impacting her energetically were getting stirred up. It's actually a very common tactic. I see this when I'm doing video sessions with someone. Let's say it's our first session and we start talking about what's going on. I will see them like start to, like, it looks like they're going to doze off. And it's because the thing that's attached to them and messing with them is trying to put them to sleep so that they won't move forward. Does that make sense? So in this case, it was a complicated situation where there was someone in this person's life that was bringing in this negative spiritual interference, and she avoided, or she just didn't know. She didn't know that that's how that works, and so for a couple of years, we never had, she didn't have a conversation or a consultation with me about what was going on because she misinterpreted the sign of what was happening. Does that make sense? So when she got real sleepy, she thought, oh, there's something wrong with this Maya lady. When in fact, that was the opposite. It was the thing that was attached to her that was making her feel sleepy and doze off. Okay. Let me see if there's anything else. Nope, that's it for that story. Here's another story. Excuse me. So there was a male client that I worked with a few times, and we were getting ready to do a clearing session, an online video long distance session. So not even in person. Okay. And this is a client who had a pretty serious amount of negative spiritual interference. That's the generic term I'm just going to use there. And before this person's session, they started having a panic attack. So thankfully, they messaged me and let me know what was going on. And I explained that although a panic attack is very overwhelming and upsetting, it's actually a really good sign in that instance because the stuff that was attached to this client was getting so stirred up, it didn't want to be cleared. Now, if we were getting ready to do something that was not going to have any impact spiritually, that wasn't going to be healing or clearing, then you better bet that entity isn't going to get stirred up. So it's literally a sign that, ooh, we're on to something. We're getting ready to do something really powerful. And this thing that's been messing with you doesn't want to be cleared. So it's trying to freak you out so that you won't have a session. And thankfully, in this case, we already had an established relationship and trust. And so he knew that what I was saying was true. And so he breathed through it. He got grounded. He did the things that he needed to do to come out of that panic attack. And then we worked together and did our spiritual work together. Those are 3 stories. I have so many different stories, And again, these are not about a certain person. I chose these 3 stories because these patterns are very, very common. At this point now, I'm gonna go ahead and read off some other patterns that I've noticed. I'm not gonna go into stories about all of them because that would just take too long. But before I go into that list, has anyone had any experience like this where you know that there's some negative spiritual interference happening in your life and you are getting ready to do something that's going to help yourself, whether it's doing a self-clearing or some kind of self-care, or working with me, or working with some other practitioner, or reading a book that you know will help you, and you you end up experiencing some kind of resistance or something that throws confusion into the mix and makes you think that maybe you're not supposed to do that thing. Have you had anything like that happen? If so, go ahead and share what it was, okay? And by the way, one of the reasons why I'm even talking about this today, why I'm creating a video on this, is because I really feel like when it comes to this psychological warfare aspect, you know, how the dark forces work and how they try to mess with your minds and trigger your triggers and all that stuff, the more you can understand about how all of that works, the less it will control you. So now you know how, now you're going to know after watching this, you're going to know even more how this works, so that if it happens, you go, oh, I know what this is. This means that we're really onto something. We're getting ready to do something really powerful. And that's why this is happening. And so you keep going. You keep going forward and do the powerful clearing work. Okay. And Tina says, yes. And I fixed it. Yep. And Tina is joining us from Bates City, Missouri. So I do need to look at my list because there's a big long list. All right. So before sessions, or getting help, so whether it's a session with me or getting some other kind of help or reading a book or doing whatever technique that's going to help clear out whatever negative spiritual interference you're experiencing, your computer might crash. So let's say that we are going to have a computer session. Then all of a sudden your computer is freezing up and you're like, oh my gosh, what's happening? Maybe we're not supposed to work together. No, actually, we probably are supposed to work together. And that resistance is happening for a reason. If we're working together over the phone, it could be an issue with your phone. So computer or device issue. Could be car trouble. If you are getting ready to get into your car to go drive to a session with someone who's going to really help you, and then all of a sudden there's car trouble or your car isn't starting, you better bet that's a huge sign that you are on track, going in the right direction, because otherwise the dark forces wouldn't bother. Like, does that make sense? I have a lot more on this list, but I want to read your comments next. Christina says, yes, she's had that happen. Tana says, I came to my first class at your house many years back. The lady beside me was dozing off. I was so self-conscious and felt I was so full of cooties at that time. I was sure it was me causing her to do so. Let me get the rest of the comment. I'm sure it was causing her to doze off. Yeah. Well, actually, it probably wasn't. It probably was some of her own stuff, right? Does that make sense now? Zahira says, I have had resistance to taking the classes sometimes, which didn't make sense to me before. Yeah, Zahira is in my paid program. So, and you also participate in a lot of my free stuff as well. So yeah, it can actually, and I don't know if I have this on the list, but like, yeah, feeling some emotional resistance. And that can look like feeling bored or like, I don't really feel like it. Oh yeah, this is on the list. Like feeling lazy. I'm not saying you're lazy or that anyone's lazy, but you know what I mean. Like you're like, do I really feel like doing it? Right? And that usually means that you're definitely supposed to do it because there's some resistance. But you feel this inclination to skip whatever it is, a class or a session or whatever. You just don't feel like it, but you don't know why. Lack of motivation, that can show up as lack of motivation as well. I've had people who get sick, and now, I mean, I know myself that real sickness actually does happen, but sometimes I can tell that it's like actually they're, it's more like they're afraid. It's more like internal, emotional, like they're afraid to take the steps necessary to do the clearing. So in fact, I'm an empath. I can usually tell if somebody is like calling in sick saying, I'm sick, but actually they're not really sick because they're just feeling resistant and like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to do this clearing. And so they'll send me a message and say that they're sick and they're not really sick, right? Or they actually do get sick. So they come down with a cold or a headache or whatever. And it's like their body has become susceptible and they end up coming down with something or not feeling well or feeling super exhausted. And that is that interference keeping them from getting the help that they need. Sometimes it's a sense of trepidation, but you don't know why. Like, I just feel really nervous about going and doing this, going to this class or having this clearing session. And it could be so much fear and trepidation that it turns into a panic attack. And so that can happen. Personal drama or emergency. So sometimes the other people in your household or in your life will suddenly have a freak out, which makes it so that you can't come to the class or go to the clearing session or read the book or whatever. And it's what I call secondary psychic attack. Secondary meaning it's actually splattering on another person. Whatever the interference is messing with that other person who then messes with you. So they're yelling at you, screaming at you, or having some kind of drama. And then you're having to deal with it. And so then it totally sucks your energy and your attention away so that you can't do the thing, whatever the thing is that you need to clear out the negative spiritual interference. We already talked about headache or getting sleepy, brain fog, you can't think straight. Okay, so let's say you're listening to a guided meditation and like you completely fall asleep. By the way, falling asleep isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes you need to get out of your own way when you're doing a guided meditation so that your system can just do its thing and reboot. But sometimes it is about that avoidance thing and that, about some negative interference putting you to sleep so that you won't be able to do the work. So, do you have anything else that you want to add to that list? Those are all the things that I thought of based on my own observations and working with clients and students and noticing what comes up for people. And then myself being an outside party, being a neutral party, being able to see like, okay, what's happening with them and why. But you all may have had some other experiences that I did not include here. Rochelle says, I was just getting to post and my phone went crazy. I currently have an attachment. Yeah, Rochelle, I've seen that happen a lot. Or the device will suddenly shut off and restart. Yep. It can be frustrating, but it's in a sense, we need to think of it as a good sign because it's like, oh, that means we're onto something. We're onto something that's going to be helpful. You're onto something that's going to be helpful. So yay, that's good. Tina says, do Reiki on the phone and wear black tourmaline to help protect you. Yep, those are things that can help for sure. Sahela says, also, I had resistance to reading your book, but I finally read it. You know what? I remember because I remember that you said that it was on your shelf and that you hadn't read it. And I forgot about this, but there were a handful of people in my world that I knew were supposed to read the book, but I'm a very low pressure person, so I'm not going to like keep bugging somebody. But I would chat with them and they would say, oh, it's still on my shelf. I haven't read it. I'll read it eventually. And it's so funny because I'm sure it was a bit of spiritual resistance that was happening. You were one of those. So I'm glad you finally read it. That's good. And she says, but I finally read it. And she says, and Sahela says she's had phone trouble as well. Nicole says, this happens to me all the time. I skip so many programs because I get a feeling of resistance to it. Right now, I'm experiencing a back pain and had to leave your last live because I was falling asleep. Yeah. So what you bring up, I think that's important to recognize that there's resistance that's happening. So the key then for everybody is to really work with developing your intuitive psychic skills, your inner knowing, so that you are able to discern, you're able to drop into your inner knowing and say, okay, is this simply that I'm tired and my body is asking for rest if I'm sleepy? Or is this some negative interference? Because it's like every time you feel sleepy, every single time you feel sleepy ever, it's not always negative spiritual interference, right? So whatever the symptoms are, it's so vital. I always say this, it's so vital to develop your personal intuitive skills. And that's something that I teach you guys. So if you want to go deeper with that, let me know. That's a big part of spiritual empowerment. So Nicole, thank you for sharing that and for bringing all that to mind for me to point out to everybody, because it's not always spiritual interference. Sometimes it is. And it's about developing your inner guidance system. Tina says, I can feel spirits and people's homes. And when you walk in, I can feel the heaviness on my shoulder or a feeling that I shouldn't be there. And I have to tell them they've got some attachments in their home. I'm so glad that you just shared that, because all those feelings that you were just describing, they all sound like negative feelings, right? But they are all important information that's telling you that there's some negative spiritual activity going on in the home. And so in that sense, it's important information. It's not necessarily interference trying to keep you from getting help. So it's kind of, I'm glad that you shared your example, because it's kind of like a different example, like apples and oranges. We have those negative feelings and those sensations that we feel that are that are tricking us from getting help. And then some of us who are very clairsentient, who feel things in our body, we might get some of those feelings because we're just being informed that there's something negative present, right? So thank you for sharing that. Tana says, I also had resistance to reading the book. Yep, you were another one where it was sitting on the shelf. I finally did, but have vague recollection of it and need to read it again. Yeah, you know what? I think you should. In fact, and I'm not telling you what to do, but I kind of feel like there's so much in the book that I notice when I'm talking to somebody about the book and they've read it, but they don't remember what the part that I'm talking about, because there's so many layers in there. So I think it's a good idea to read it twice. So if you've already read it, read it again. I think you'll get different things from it. So, Darkness Disguised as Light. It's on Amazon and it's on Kindle and paperback and everything. Just FYI, in case you resonate with reading it. It's there. It's information out there in the universe for you. Rochelle says, I also signed up for a Reiki class and got extremely sick the night before the class. I still went, but I remained sick for 3 weeks after. So with Reiki, with a situation like that, sometimes with taking a Reiki class, it really is a spiritual initiation. If you've ever taken a Reiki training, all of you watching, it's a spiritual initiation. So what it does is it activates a cleanse. So if you've ever done like an herbal cleanse, for example, or a juicing cleanse or something like that, you know that sometimes you can feel kind of sick for a few days as all the toxins are leaving. Then that can actually happen for some people with taking a Reiki training because it detoxes your system. Yep. So in fact, that's so well known that a lot of teachers, including myself, when we do the Reiki 1 class, we explain that whole the possible detox that can happen. It sounds like it was a little more intense for you than for most. I'm glad you're through it now. Oops, I missed a message okay, here we go. Tina says, I love this group more. It has more that people need to know. Yes, cool. Well, I'm glad that you're here, Tina. I miss you all the way in Kansas City. Nicole says, I hadn't thought of it as a negative spiritual interference before now. Yep. So it's up to developing your spiritual discernment, your inner discernment, so you can tell, is this good? Is this bad? Is this interference? And my heat just popped on. It's kind of noisy. I hope it's not too loud. Zahira says, I think I will read it again too. Wonderful. Hi, Sharon. Good to see you. Tina says, I had an experience recently. I had somebody thought it was funny to make fun of me about being an empath. They sent me a haunted bear to cleanse without even asking me. I felt it was haunted and sent it back. I hope I did the right thing. Yeah, I mean, you are not responsible for clearing every haunted, I assume it was like a stuffed animal. Is that what you're saying? If somebody sends you something, you're not responsible for clearing all of it. And that's how I feel as well. Like, I don't feel responsible for clearing the entire planet. Like, and neither are you. So because then you're totally depleted. You can't help anyone. So you've got to set those boundaries. I feel like you did the right thing to send it back. That's what I would have done. Like, that's one of those WTF moments. Like, why did you send this to me with no heads up ahead of time? That's kind of weird, but whatever. Okay, so do you have any questions? We've basically gone through all of the content now. So do you have any questions? And I appreciate all of the stories that you all told. That's awesome. Do you have any questions or any final thoughts? And while I am waiting for those comments and questions to come through, I want to just give you some quick information. So first of all, if you want to go deeper with me in developing your spiritual gifts, you can do so by applying for the Spiritual Empowerment Academy. And that's a 12-month online program. You can get information about it by going to my website, Psychic Protection Sanctuary, and then under the events tab, you'll see the Spiritual Empowerment Academy. Click on that, and there's an application. I do require that anyone who joins goes through an application process because only the people who are the right fit on both ends, that it's a good fit for you, it's a good fit for the people who are already in the program, are allowed to enter into the class. It is going now. So if you're interested, hop on there. And then I also have later on tonight is my monthly class for the spiritual, what is it called? I forgot it. Psychic Protection Insiders. That's a $12.99 a month group. It's like the same price as Netflix, okay? Although not as many videos as Netflix, okay? It's a one Facebook Live per month. It's the Psychic Protection Insiders group. And again, go to my website and under the events tab, you'll see it. And tonight is our monthly class in the members only Facebook group. And in that group, tonight's class, we're covering jinn, which is a type of entity, versus skinwalkers, which is another kind of entity, what they are and what the differences are. The purpose of that group compared to this one is that group is my opportunity to be able to talk about all the way more fringe, weird, really weird stuff, like interdimensional weirdness. And so it's very simple. It's just that one Facebook Live. But anyway, if you're interested in that, check it out. Now we have some comments, so let's go back to comments here. Tina says, thank you, sweetie. Hi, Karen. Tana says, I want to point out that fear can be a huge roadblock. One of my tougher things I had to work through. Yep. And fear is a major manipulation tool used by the dark forces. Like whatever, through triggering your triggers, triggering your fears, triggering your old traumas and hurts and wounds and all of that, and getting you so freaked out and terrified, and thinking that more, like for example, getting you to believe that you're in way more danger than you actually are, and it's a psychological game to make you feel terrified. And so a lot of times it's a whole manipulation ploy, and there's really not, like, for example, there are a lot of entities out there that will try to make you believe that they are way more powerful than they actually are. And when they convince you to be really scared and to think that they're more powerful than you are, then they win. Okay, then they have control. So that fear thing is a big manipulation tactic. Rochelle says, do you have advice on how to make these spirits detach? I seem to be a magnet for these spirits, or one keeps returning. So I'll give you two answers. The first is that detaching entities can be, there's a lot to it. And that's why I have the Spiritual Empowerment Academy. Like that's where there's a whole archive of content where you can learn how to do that. There's a million different tools and techniques. But I do want to give you at least something that you can start with that will help. It's not the be all end all, but a lot of people have found that burning frankincense resin, like actual frankincense pellets, not the fake synthetic incense stick, but actual frankincense. Frankincense is, well, there's a reason why the Catholic Church has used it for eons and eons. They don't use it as much. They should still be using it, in my opinion. But it's really effective for clearing out darker entities. It doesn't clear out everything. I've experimented with a lot of different tools, but that's what I would say. Start with that and see where you get, because it does tend to act as like a bug bomb for most entities. You do have to keep redoing it. It's not like you do it once and the entities leave forever, but most people for a while will need to do it every day, or at least every 3 days, to keep the stuff from coming back. So try that and see how that helps. Okay, that's probably the simplest tip that I could give. That's way less complicated than the things that we cover in the program. Tana says, spiritual activity can attempt to cause lots of fear. Yes, ma'am. That's so true. Zahira says, I'll get mixed up or forget the class sometimes when I was sure about it. It might be interference or brain fog. I do think it is interference with you, Zahira. That's what my guidance is telling me. So now that you know, don't let yourself go into fear about it, but just be aware that that's a thing that happens. And so, you know, you can take extra actions to try to stay organized with your schedule, but just do the best that you can with it. Sometimes just being aware helps to lift some of that interference. Tina, how much for that group? So my philosophy is I'm not saying that you're a bargain shopper, but here's my answer. I'm really picky about who's allowed in the program. I don't want anyone who's bargain shopping and saying, how much is it? What I want to request is that anybody who feels guided, who feels really drawn to the program, go to my website, psychicprotectionsanctuary.com. Under the events tab, click on the Spiritual Empowerment Academy and just notice how you feel. If you feel really aligned, because there's a bunch of words there, but they're just words explaining. Notice how you feel. If you feel a very strong alignment and a strong pull, then go ahead and do the application. And in the application process, there's some pricing information. If you don't feel fully aligned, then I don't want you to apply. I'm saying this to everybody. Don't apply, because my experience that I've had over the years with everything that I do in life is that if there's not full alignment, it usually doesn't go well. Like, it's just not as good. And my intention is that everything is going to be like optimal and the best possible for you, for me, for everybody. So listen to your inner guidance and flow from that rather than how much does it cost. Okay. So that's my philosophy on that. So follow your guidance. There is some pricing information in the application, but only click on that if you feel really, really aligned. Okay. Zahira says, wish I could be in that class tonight. I have a doctor's appointment. Yeah. Oh my gosh. The Psychic Protection Insiders. Yeah. We're going to talk about Jinn versus skinwalkers, and that is going to be super cool. Tina, the veil is very thin right now. That's why you need to know and learn all you can. I so agree. I'm so glad that you're here, Tina. You've got some real juicy comments today. Tina says, putting frankincense oil on you for clearing out an entity. My experience and observation with clients and working with myself is that the frankincense oil can be a soft protection tool, but it doesn't tend to remove entities. But I have found that using the frankincense resin and the smoke, that does tend to loosen them and lift them off. Also, I do have another easy tip since we're doing easy tips. Saltwater bath. Any kind of salt, I don't care, any salt. Take a salt bath. That also helps to loosen up any attachments. Okay? Those are the two easy peasy, most effective tips that I can give. Elissa, wow, we have so many comments. That's awesome. I'm going to finish reading comments and then we're going to wrap up for the night. So if you have anything else, be sure to get it in because I'm going to end in just a minute. Alyssa says, I had a friend that I used to hang out with almost on a daily. Anytime I went into her home, I felt unwelcome and scared. As I began to tell her about it, it felt anger surrounding me. Later that night, see, I've just lost my place. I felt anger surrounding me later that night after telling her I got sick, having her to leave the room, couldn't be around her without feeling threatened. Would you see that as her having an attachment? Yeah, okay. So this would be an example not of the dark forces trying to keep you from getting help, all of those stories that I told before. This is more of an example of, I forget who else had a story like this. Maybe it was Tina, where you're feeling things in your body that are giving you a clear information that there's negative spiritual activity going on. And so that's information like FYI, there's bad stuff going on spiritually, right? So without doing a full reading on her, because I'm just going to choose not to go deep into that right now. But I can say, just looking at the information, for sure, there was definitely some negative spiritual activity going on, at least in the home, right? And you know that. Like you know that, but sometimes we second guess ourselves when we're new to this sort of stuff. But you were getting very clear signs that there's something wrong. So in that case, I hope that you took good care of yourself by not engaging with that energy anymore. Rochelle says, thank you. You are welcome. Sahela says, thank you, Maya. Tina says, group tonight is the $12.99. $12.99, Psychic Protection Insiders. Actually, the name of the group is Psychic Protection Insiders, $12.99 a month. Like, that's the name of the group. Okay, so it's $12.99. Nicole says, the first time I used frankincense, I was up all night. It is really high vibe for me, and I have to burn it either in the day. I have to burn it earlier in the day. But that first night, I couldn't wait. Yeah. And actually, there's something that I didn't have on the list. I was having a group class about psychic protection, and there was someone who, we were just getting ready to do a group clearing. And I was aware that this person had a lot of entity attachments, poor gal, because she was getting involved. She kept insisting on being involved in spiritual activities that were just filled with Wookiees. I mean, there was so much nasties going on spiritually in the stuff that she was engaging with. And she has free will, so she was choosing to still go to those events. But then when she showed up to my event, she had hundreds of entity attachments. So we got ready to do a group clearing. And as we got ready to do it, she suddenly ran out of the room. She felt like she was going to throw up. She ran into the bathroom. She didn't actually throw up, but she thought she was going to. And then she grabbed her stuff and left. She left early, and that's fine. She did what she needed to do, but that was very interesting, right? It was just too intense. She wasn't able to experience the clearing. So nausea is another symptom of the dark forces trying to trick you into not getting the help that you need. Sahela, one more comment, says, my right shoulder gets cold and I think it might be a spirit. Yeah, it could be. You and I can talk about that later in one of our sessions. Okay, we are all done. Everybody asked perfect questions. So those of you who asked questions, I appreciate all the questions that you asked. And everybody who made comments, great comments. I just really want to emphasize that. And then some of you made comments that then brought things to mind that I ended up talking about, which I'm really grateful for. Important information. So thank you to everybody who participated, who shared stories, who asked questions. That actually, like this particular class in particular, I could have gotten on here and talked on this topic for 20 minutes, which would have been fine. But instead, we had all of these really great stories that we were able to share as well to fill it in more and make it more dynamic and informative. So thank you for that. Okay, everybody, I think we are all done for tonight. You know where to reach me. You can email me or message me on Facebook, on my website. There's a contact form, psychicprotectionsanctuary.com. You can send me an email if you need anything. Thanks, you all. Sending you all my love. And we have Facebook Live in here once a month, so I will see you next time. Sending you lots of love. Bye.